29a, fifth line from the top. So we're in the middle of discussing the derivation of the two different types of pigul, which is the Torah specifically talks about chutz lizmano, when you eat the carbon outside of its allotted time, and the Gemara has applied that to, as we'll discuss further today, has applied that to thinking in advance that you're going to eat it outside of the time. And then there's also chutz limkomo, which is not specifically mentioned in the Torah's pigul, but we include that as well, outside of its the geographical location, the mikdash or Yerushalayim, depends on which it's supposed to be eaten.
But I thought we don't get, didn't we learn yesterday, if I understood this, that one does not get karet for chutz l'makomo.
Koma, right. So there are differences. That's correct. Amalev Papalarava. Ledidach, according to you. Shlishi de Parshas Kedoshim. Oh, so one thing I should also say, recap, is that there were two places in the Torah where Pigul was mentioned. One is in Tzav and one is Parshas Kedoshim. So Rava had said, we derive everything, all the rules, the rules about Pigul from from the Parshas Tzav. So Rav Papa says to Rava, according to you, Shlish Parshas Kedoshim to you, my Darsha space. So what do you do with that extra, that whole chapter, the whole paragraph is extra? Right? So the answer is, Vayla, you need that by Yom HaShlishi, right? Where the Torah says, if you eat if you eat from it on the third day of a 2-day carbon, it doesn't do the ritzui, it doesn't atone for you, or doesn't satisfy God. That teaches us that by Yom HaShlishi, it's not referring to the third day, but the law it's teaching you is that the place specified for eating the carbon by the person who's doing the pigul, who's like thinking about eating it outside of its place, has to be a place that has three properties. It has to be fit for consuming the blood, the meat, and the emurim, the pieces that are put on the mizbeach.
But does someone eat the emurim? They don't eat them, do they? Are those the fats?
Right, but no, not the emurim are the
innards, the innards, the intestines and the right. Isn't that right? No.
What are the emurim? I think. 1 second.
Aren't they the intestines and the various organs?
Okay, so yeah, so let that. I think you're probably right. So, but you have to, in other words, to trip up with pigul, you have to intend for these three things to be done outside of their correct place. Now, as you say, you don't eat the fat, you don't eat the blood, but you're saying 1 second. All right, it has to be a place outside of a place that is fit for all three things. In other words, the Zrikas Adam, which took place in the Kodesh, and on the Mizbeach, the burning of the Emurim on the Mizbeach, and the eating of the meat. Right? It has to be a place that you have to be thinking of a place outside of a place that is fit for all three of these activities.
So Rashi says, "Hainu chutz la'azara."
Yeah, because the only place that counts for Dam and Emurim is the Azara, right? So, if you're thinking about
V'shat heter behemod lafuke heichel she'ein bo hakatot emurim.
Oh, B'shas Heter Abamos, right? I forgot that. Right, B'shas Heter Abamos. So right, you could, in the time before the Beis Hamikdash, where you could bring a carbon on a private altar, then there's no emurim, and there's no yeah, in the Azara, you could not eat the 1 second. Um,
So in the Heichel they could not bring the emurim and they couldn't eat the basar if it was. Is that what he means?
one second. Sorry. Oh, okay. It's talking about like the general idea of a place that uh, in another we're talking about the time of the Mikdash, but you have to take into account that there was a time where um, where
When people had private bamot, they
right.
could sacrifice at a certain time. It was a time in history.
So it has to be a place in which, at some time in history, this was a place that was fit for the dam basar and emurim, but not for this particular carbon, right? So, in other words, to have the chutzlim komo designation, it has to be kodesh kodashim outside of the Azara, or kodshim kalim outside of Yerushalayim. Because in the time of when bamos were permitted before the Beis Hamikdash, um, uh, you could do Obama, right? You could do Zrika Saddam, you could do burning the Amurim, you could do eating the meat, right? So if you intend to eat something outside, let's say outside of Yerushalayim, so that's chutzlim that counts as chutzlim komo. But if you intended to eat it in the Heichal, which is not where you're supposed to be eating the carbon. Um, right, so the hechal was never it was used for the domine murim, but not for eating the meat. Um, so so that this extra pasuk in Kedoshim teaches you that chuslim komo applies to um, the hechal, right? Um,
But it's also not the emurim, right? It says, "But the avuke echo she'ein bo haketort emurim v'lo achilat basar." So they could bring the dam, but not the emurim or the
right, the dam obviously is only in the azara and on the mizbeach, right? That's where you do the zrika sadam.
and the other two could not be done in the heichel. Is that what he's
Right.
saying?
Yeah. Um, okay, so that's kind
It-
of a
It's a little
an
confusing that
arcane
Rashi.
rule.
Not sure I quite fully understand. I understand almost every word, but to put it together, I'm not sure.
Well, let's add what it's doing is the Bayom Hashlishi in Precious Kedoshim, instead of referring to Kutzli Lizmano, as you know the pshat is, but we're saying that the drasha is we're gonna apply it to the Chutzlim Komo, and we're going to say that Chutzlim Komo applies to the Heichal because that is a place where where you can't do all three of these activities. So the Gemara asks typically Mikra Kama. You can get that from Parsha Sav. Im He'achal Yachel. It also says Bayom Hashlishi. Midav Kerachman Bilshon Shlishi. If you're saying the word Shlishi is going to be what indicates that, you can get that from Parsha Sav as well. Amar Vashi, Amritel Shmata Kamid Rav Masna. I told this to Rav Masna. Amar, and he said, Ime Hasam Havamin. If we're going to take it from Bayom Hashlishi and Parsha Sav, I would have said Shlishi Prat Pigul Klal Vanasa Klal Musaf Ala Prat. Then we get into the idea of Klal Prat, right? And then the drush, if in Parsha Sav, the Shlish Bayom Hashlishi is a Prat. It's a like it's we're understanding it as limiting it to a certain place, a place with all three of these, where all three of these can be activities can take place, and pigul, but then when it generalizes, it says pigul who. That's pigul. So that's a kind of a generalization. So how are we going to darshan that? Manasa klal musaf ala prat. So then the rule of pigul must be adding something. Like, why does the Torah say pigul who? Right? It doesn't even need to say that. So by saying pigul who, we're including something else. Visrabu sharmakomo. So I would have said that means to include other places, right? All the places, not just the places with the three criteria. So Kamashwan, so that's why the Torah has to say it again in Parshas Kedoshim. It's a little weak because then you could also ask, like, so what does it say by Yom HaShlishi for at all, right? Like, if you're going to exclude by the place where there's three activities and then include it again, or sorry, where there are not three activities and then include it again, then what did you need it for in the first place? But the Gemara doesn't go there.
So Shlishi doesn't refer to a time here then. It refers to
Right,
a
right.
place.
Yeah, and this whole like everything about Pigel is a little weird that way, right? Because we don't take things at their face value. I mean, as we'll see in a minute, if we take the words at face value, it's the actual eating outside of its time, not the thinking about. But there's drashas in the pasuk where the Torah Shabbal Peh applies it to thinking about in advance, having the wrong thought, and we're going to see that right now.
Well, I thought we learned, I think yesterday, that the eating is derived from a pasuk that talks about notar mimeno. So that's something separate. Whereas the
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Kedoshim and Sav refer to these two aspects of Pigo, either
Right.
chutz lezman and chutz lemakom,
Right.
lekomom.
Right, but you don't get that from the pshat of the pasuk. The pshat is quite clear. If you eat from it on the third day, it's possible. All right, you can't get more clear than that. But as you say, the Gemara twists it a little bit so that we get the Torah Shabbal Peh understands it differently than the plain pshat,
So
which
one
is
is
often the case. It's just very blatant here.
so one is only permitted according, I mean, the obvious shot would be that one is permitted to eat this food for 2 days, day one and day two.
And that's the case, right? But we know that from Nosar, right? From the rule
Right.
of Nosar. Yeah.
Well, that's for a shlomim. The other things, I don't even think it's 2 days.
Oh, different. So yeah, different. I mean,
Right.
the different carbonos have different time periods, but a typical one is a 1 night and 2 days.
Uh, well, so some of them don't even allow you to eat the second day, right?
That's correct.
Yeah.
Yeah, but we're just taking this as a a sample case. It would
Right.
apply
I understand.
equally. Okay. Tana Rabbana. So we saw that if as we just discussed, if you eat from the carbon from the Zevach Shlamim Bayom Shlishi on the third day, lo yeratzeh. Amar Balazar, Kof Azna Chali Shmuel. Listen carefully. B'mechashev lechem izivcha Bayom Shlishi kasum medar. We're talking about thinking about the intention to, excuse me, the intention to eat on the third day. I'm not talking about real actually eating it on the third day that makes it pickle, although it's forbidden, as we said, but that doesn't make it pickle. So, why don't we understand it in the plain pshat? Amras echashu kasher yachzer pasel. Like Pegel makes the carbon invalid. So you're telling me that on day you have a, could it be that a you have a carbon, you eat from it on the first day, you eat from it on the second day, and everything's fine, and it's kosher, and it's a good carbon, and then by eating it on the third day, you retroactively make it possible. You retroactively make it not a carbon, not a valid carbon, right? How could that be? Um, or Rabbi Kiva says to him, yeah, it could be. Hey, Matsinu Bezov, Assurance Yom, Keneged Yom. I'll give you another case of a completely different rule, but one that applies retroactively. If a person is a Zav, or various kinds of tuma, and um, they have to have 3 days, or 3 days or 7 days of where they do not have any emission, right? So they become a zav, right? You have this flow for whatever time period you become a zav, and then you start counting clean days. First day, it's a clean day, right? So you're um, that that counts as one day. Second day is a clean day. That counts as one day. The third day you have a flow again, so that cancels out the first and the second day. That they're so the hembecheskas tahara, they're assumed to be tahar. Um, you know, uh, After on their first two clean days, the Keren Sharo Sosru, but then it turns out that they were Tame on that day, right? Retroactively. Afatalti smells acid. Don't wonder about this. Shalfi Jushar. She also it could be retroactively invalidated. Malay Srabbelosser
But
says,
don't we make a
"Hooray,
distinction there between a zav, what do you call it? Zav katana, zav gadola, right? So one has to, at a certain point he has to do tevila, and then he has to do bring a korban right after it's three,
mm-hmm.
3 days. There's a distinction between the type of right, isn't that
Zav, yes, I think it's how Zav Katana um, because you don't require that. Like you're not with the Zava Gadola. I think again, I'm not all that well versed in the rules of Taro when we're not learning Taros, but I think that Zava Gadola, you're tame until you go to the mikveh and bring the carbon at the end of the
right?
period. But Zava Katana,
Yeah.
it's not the case, right? You are provisionally tahar, but then you could be retroactively made tame from the day before. So I'm
So
gonna
what's the
Lazar Hari.
nafkamina? But
Hmm.
what? So what? So once he receives another the mission, the zav, whatever whatever it is. What's the nafkamina if he's tame at that moment he becomes tame? So what's the nafkamina that he's tame 2 days ago?
Let's say yesterday you ate kachim, right? Because you assumed you were tahar, and then it turns out retroactively you become you were tame at the time, so you have a problem. You have to bring a chatos, I guess.
Oh, so that oh,
Right?
so
So
so that's it.
it's similar in that, while you're eating, in the case of pigul, while you're eating the carbon on the first day and the second day, you're good, everything's fine, right? And then it turns out you're by eating it on the third day, you retroactively made it not a good carbon. It wasn't kosher, basically, retroactively. So Rabbi Kiva says, yeah, you have a case like that, and Rabbi Lesser says, Hari Omer Hamakri
So what
b'shas
is the well,
hakravan
what is the
yisrael.
pigo? Where pigo refers to a thought. So after if he eats it for
That's
two
what we're
days,
arguing about. That's what we're arguing about.
so
So
on
Rabbi
the
Lazar
third
says it
day,
refers to a thought, and Rabbi Akiva's count is arguing with him, saying, "I don't think so, um, because maybe it really refers to actual eating."
uh-huh.
Rabbi Lazar says, but that would be retroactive. And Rabbi Kiva says, yeah, it would be retroactive, but it's okay. Like we have cases where things can be retroactive. And Rabbi Lazar says, "Arei Omer hamakriv b'shas hakrav yisrael," because it says hamakriv also the one who offers it will not get his ritzui, will not get credit for the carbon. So by using the word hamakriv, the person who offers it, b'shas hakrav yisrael, it's talking about something that pigul is something that invalidates the carbon at the time that you bring the carbon. And obviously, you haven't got to the third day to eat it yet. So it must be talking about, says Rebbe Lazar, thinking about eating it in the wrong time, at the time that you're doing the carbon. But actually eating it on the third day is not what makes it pigul. Again, you're not allowed to eat it on the third day. That's no sar, but it doesn't make it pigul. And the difference is, no, sir, the carbon was a good carbon, but just you had a violation of the rules, right? Pigul, the carbon was never a good carbon. Oino Omer Hamakriv, Elo Ze Kohen Hamakriv. Maybe the word Hamakriv also doesn't mean at the time of the Hakrava. It means the thought or sorry, the eating of the carbon outside of the time period that makes it pigul is only the Kohen who's actually doing the Hakrava, is doing the sacrificing. Maybe that's what it means. Kishu Omer also, Hamakriv also. The object of the pasuk is clearly the carbon, not the Kohen. Okay, so this is Rebbe Lezer's source, right? That since it says hamakriv, also it's something that happens at the time of the carbon that makes the carbon pigul, and that would be the intention in advance of eating it. That's in the wrong place or time.
But pigo refers to the person. The person has to bring a he's responsible. It's his thought. The Corbin, the animal doesn't have a thought.
Right. But hamakriv also the it's the bringing of the korban, the word hamakriv refers to the owner, not the kohen,
Right, okay.
because yeah,
But it still doesn't refer to the animal.
correct.
So the animal
Well,
may be, well, an
yeah,
animal's puzzle now because someone had a thought, right?
yes,
But the person, the one who's responsible for the thought is the person, whether we say
yeah,
the
yeah, yeah,
Kohen or the Makriv or the person, and
exactly,
not the animal. The animal doesn't responsible for the animal's thoughts. I mean,
correct.
we don't go that far.
Yeah, correct. Um, and now we're going a little deeper on this word oso. Ben Azai Omer, oso matam lar. Why does the Torah say hamakriv oso? Why does it say it? Lefishan emar los acher l'shalmo. The Torah says don't be late with your neder, right? If you make a neder, then bring it in the right time. Don't be late. Maybe that's also a time period that if you violate that, then the carbon becomes pigul, right? Talomar oso. So that's why the Torah includes the word about pigul. It says oso. This one, chutz lizmana, chutz limkomo, that makes pigul, not someone who's late in fulfilling the vow. Also, the making the carbon invalid, that applies only to pigul of chutz lizman and chutz l'mkomo, and not being late with bringing the carbon. And so acherim amrim, others say lo yechashev. The hamakriv also lo yechashev lo pigulia. The It doesn't get applied to the account of the makriv of the person who's bringing the carbon. But machshava hu nifsal ve'el nifsal b'shlishi. By using this word lo yechashev, it doesn't count, right? But that's how I translate it colloquially. But it uses the word, the root chashav, right, to think, right? So that indicates that it's the thought to acherim that indicates it's the thought of eating at chutz lizman and chutz limkama that makes it pigul. Uben Azai, but what about Ben Azai? So according to Ben Azai, he says that the word lo, oso, the word oso tells you about this, that applies only to pigul and not to someone who's late with his neder. Where does he get um, so how does he get the idea that the Torah is talking about the owner of the Zavach and not the Kohen? So the Gemara gives two answers. Well, that's what the acherim is for, right? From the word lo yechashev, that tells you that it's in advance. V'baisema midachsiv lo yeratzeh v'lo yeratzeh zivchahu. Um, like, uh, so it's not from the word oso; it's from the word lo yeratzeh. Like, what is a thing that ritsui applies to? Not the kohen, but the korban. So that's where you get it from. Uben
No,
Azai,
what's we talked about the vow. It makes a netter, but a netter doesn't always involve a korban, does it?
correct. So okay, fine,
I
but
mean, a person could make a netter that or she is not going to eat ice cream. Wow, whatever.
right,
And so
okay, but
there's
when
no
when
korban
it's
involved, right?
fine, right, but when it's about a carbon, you might have thought that that makes the carbon pigul. So this tells you no, it's only either from lo yechashev or oso. Pigul only applies to chutz lizman or chutz limkomo, and not to being late with your neder of a carbon.
Mm-hmm. All right.
Uben Azai also below Yeratza ve'en macher nidra below Yeratza mihachanafka. According to Ben Azai, where do you get the rule that lo Yeratza applies only to a carbon and not to chusl zman chuslim komo, but not to a late to bringing a carbon late? Midacherim nafka. That he gets certainly from lo yechashev. Right, that the Acherim quote. The Tanya, we have a brace. Acherim amrim, yochel yebachor sheibra shanaso Maybe you would think that a Bachar, right? You have to bring within the first year as a carbon. And once it becomes more than a year old, then maybe that's becomes it becomes invalid for a sacrifice. So okay, you should have brought it as a Bachar, but you didn't. right? And it's now over a year old. Can you use it for another carbon? So they're proposing maybe you can't because it's, it was a Bechor and it wasn't offered properly. Talmud Lomar, what do you eat before God? Maser Sheni. So, Makish Bechor Lemaser. So Bechor and Maser are next to each other, right? So Ma Maser and Yisrael Mishan al Chaver. So just as Maser Sheni, you can keep it over 1 year. Af Bechor and Yisrael Mishan al Chaverta. Yeah, you should have brought it in the first year, but by not having brought it in the first year, it doesn't make it possible. Um,
So is it brought as a different type of korban then? I mean, can it be used
no,
for
I think
something else?
it means you can bring it as a Bechor. You should have brought it earlier, but you didn't. So that's your bad. But you could still bring it as a Bechor even after it's a year old. So if that's the case, so that can serve as a model for any late donation, right? If you can do that with a Bechor, you should be able to do that with any carbon that you voluntarily decided to bring. Whereas it's not necessarily. I need to tell you that. Maybe that would only apply to Bechor Delav Bar Hartzahu, because Bechor is not like an atonement for something, right? It's a rule. It's like Maser, right? There's a rule that you have to bring this offer to God, but it's not like you did a sin, therefore you have to bring a carbon to expiate yourself. All right, so maybe that's why it's okay to bring a Bechor late. Like it still counts as a Bechor. Avokashim didn't there, Tzaninu, but Kachim, where it's supposed to atone for something. Once you've passed the time period, maybe I would say, no, you've missed your time period. Liratzu, maybe it doesn't work. So Ben Azai is telling us that, even the late carbon doesn't make it, even bringing it late, a donation late doesn't make the carbon possible. It's wrong, but it doesn't make the carbon possible, unlike Pigul, which where the carbon is possible.
Well,
So
is
Gemara
there a
says,
time period for it's a person owes the chatat for I don't know whatever he did. He was violating Shabbat or unintentionally, but he did something. I mean, is there a time
I
period? Does he
think
have
I
to bring
think
it
no.
within a week, a month, a year?
I think no.
I didn't think so.
Um,
I mean, that's what I'm thinking. I mean, he
yeah.
realizes he has to bring he doesn't have the animal yet, needs some money, so brings it 3 weeks later, or
Mhm.
4 months later. I mean, he still knows he has to. Maybe it's until the next Yom Kippur. I mean, or can he bring it 10 years later?
I have read speculation about what happens when the Beis Hamikdash is rebuilt. Everybody's going to be liable to like gazillion chatos, right? Because we've all made mistakes, right? So what are we going to do? We're going to have a nonstop parade of chatos offerings. So I think that there is no time limit for ritzui, unlike for a donation for Nandava, where there is a time that you're supposed to bring it.
Well, what's the time limit
Oh,
there?
so the Gemara discusses that. Is it like 3 Moedim? Is it 2 Moedim? Or a whole year? The Gemara elsewhere discusses that in detail.
Hmm.
Um, okay. Nafka. Wait a minute, the Gemara says. You can still get this idea from the overdue Nadavos, right? Because it says if bring your Nadavos on time, because if you don't, you'll have a sin, right? Um, Velo b'karban chachet. So the Gemara elsewhere derives that you have a sin, but there's no problem with the carbon, right? So there's already a pasuk that tells you that bringing a carbon late, bringing your nadava late, doesn't invalidate it because v'lo b'karban chachet. So what do we need?
Oh, so
Uh,
now wait, you're telling you. I thought you said a moment ago there is a time limit for Nidava. That the Gemara elsewhere that say there is it.
yeah,
Now,
yeah. There's a time limit, but does it make it puzzle? That's what we're talking about. Pigul is unique in that it makes your carbon puzzle, right? And you have to bring it again. Things like nosar or being late, right? Those. That's a problem. You're not supposed to do it, but it doesn't affect the validity of the carbon,
hmm.
right? And here's another place we can get that from. Veloba carbon chachay. You may have sinned by bringing it late, right? But it doesn't mean that the carbon itself is a wrong carbon, is a puzzle carbon, right? So we have a place where we get that from. So what would Ben Azai say? No, he uses that for something else, right? He doesn't get this idea from Vaya B'chachet. What he derives from Vaya B'chachet is like, you you'll have the sin, but not your not your wife. What does this mean? Salkadatakhamina might have thought, Halvi Amar Rabbi Lazar, Vitam Rabbi Yochanan, since Rabbi Lazar said, Any Shoshal Meisalim Kain, Mevakshim Men Mama Vien Lo. Why does a person's wife die? Is because he didn't pay his debts, right? He wasn't able to pay his debts, therefore his wife dies. Imein L'chal Shalem, Shanamar Imein L'chal Shalem, Lama Yikach Mishkavcha Mitachtecha, in, I think in Mishlei. Yeah, if you don't have, it says if you don't have money to pay your debts, then literally it means why should the creditor take your bed, right? Your collateral. But we're understanding Mishkavcha is the one you sleep with, right? Your wife. So in other words, if you can't pay your debts, your wife is in mortal danger. So since Balta Acher, like Balta Acher L'Shamo, not bringing your nadav on time is akin to not paying your debts on time. So I might think that this is something that puts your wife in danger. Kamash tells you no. Listen, we want you to bring your nadavos on time, but it's not so bad if you don't that your wife is going to die. Okay.
Now, how do we stem this with many of the kolalim where the women work and they're the ones who bring in the money? So then, the debts are accumulated to them because they're the ones who pay the bills.
Good one. Yeah, maybe the husbands are at risk. Okay. That's a modern day riff on this Gemara. Okay. So we said before, or no, we're saying that Acherim say b'machshava hu nifsal, that ve'ena nifsal b'shlishi. It's it's the thinking in the, yeah, we said this before. It's thinking in advance of eating it on the third day, but that makes the carbon possible. But not actually eating it on the third day, that doesn't make the carbon possible. Rebbe Lazar, but Rebbe Lazar says lo yechashev ma'avi. Right? So when is he used? Like we said, like the word lo yechashev indicates that it's talking about machshava, it's talking about thoughts. So, but Rebbe Lazar, who says no, it applies to actually eating it on the third day, why does it say lo yechashev? B'baylo could Rabbi Yana. Rabbi Yana said, "Minayin l'machshavos shemotzio zu mizu." Um, uh, um, that if you have two different intentions, one, I'm going to eat it on Sunday, and the other, no, I'm going to eat it on Tuesday, that they cancel each other out. This says Rav Yanai, Shenamar lo yechashev, lo ye'ariv bo machashavos acheros. That, no, it doesn't work that way because lo yechashev, he understands it as we any thought counts and it doesn't get canceled by other thoughts. I'm not sure exactly how he sees that in the words lo yechashev, but anyway. Rav Mari
No, what
understands
is
as
he saying
follows.
there? Lo yarev usually means not to mix, not to combine mixed different machshavot, right?
Yeah, yeah, it tells you that that conflicting thoughts about when you're going to eat it cancel each other out.
So then there would be no piggle then.
Right,
If he has more than one thought, I'm going to eat Tuesday, Thursday,
right.
his thoughts in his mind cross
No
the
pigul.
hemisphere and they brain hemisphere and they cancel each other out. So there's no piggle.
Exactly, and he gets that from lo yechashev. Rav Mari Masne, Amar Rabbi Yanai, Minayim Mechashev B'Kashim Shuloka. Um, uh, Rav Mari taught about Rabbi Yanai that he said, how do you know that someone who has pigul thought gets malchus? Lo yechashev, um, which he understands as um, intent, like it's a low tase to have this intention. So you got malchus. Wait, there's no action here. There's only thought.
Right.
And look at all of you can't get malchus for a bad thought. Yeah, but there is an opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. Yeah, Lav Shem Malchus Shem B'Masa Lokin. Rabbi Yehuda says that yeah, you do get malchus for it. So that's what I'm basing myself on.
How do they know what the other person's thinking?
Well, the person has to admit it, right? I mean,
Exactly.
yeah,
Exactly. But if he doesn't say anything,
right.
you can't give him output, right? I mean,
Yeah, right, right. Okay, so now Klaus is the Mishnah. Kol hashocher v'makabel v'mahalech v'hazorek. Anybody doing any of the avoda, slaughtering, catching the blood, taking the blood to the mizbeach, and sprinkling it on the mizbeach. Um, if you do any of those things, lechol davar shadarko lechol, with the intent to eat something edible, it's supposed to be eaten. Lahaktir davar shadarko lahaktir, kazayis. Or to to offer to burn it on the mizbeach, which is supposed to be burned, and it's the size of a kazayis, chutzlim kamo, and your intention was to eat it to do that outside the right place. Pasul vein bakars, it invalidates the carbon, but there's no karis penalty. Chutzlis mano pigul v'chayav and love karis. But if the intention was outside of its time period, then you do get kares, right? You mentioned this before, Ken, at the beginning of this year.
right.
Um, as long as the rest of the carbon is done properly. Um, required. Um, Yeah, so you only get kares if everything else about the carbon was done properly, right up to the sprinkling of the blood. If you abandon the carbon, you never do the zrikas adam, then the pigul doesn't apply. Of course, the carbon is still no good because you didn't do the avoda, but you don't get kares.
Now,
Okay,
don't
so
we? I'm a question here. Don't didn't we just said 2 minutes ago, right? There's an opinion that holds, who is it, Ramari or Rabbi Yehuda, that a person could get malkut, right? So
mhm.
now we're learning that
Now we're talking
it's
about
Pigol,
kares.
isn't it Kimle the Rabamine? Why would he get malkut if he's getting karet?
Oh, mm, hmm. Well, kamei midrabimine, I believe, applies only in monetary cases, no?
I'm not. I don't know. That's beyond me. I don't. I mean, I know the concept and where it applies. I don't know. Maybe
Hmm.
that's the case.
I think that's the case. Um, okay. I mean, Rav Yehuda's a ton also, so you could argue with this Mishnah. There's another way you could get around that. So the Mishnah is going to explain a little further. Case karva matir kimitzvah. So what does it mean that you do the carbon properly? Shachat b'shtika. You do the shlita without any thoughts without any negative thoughts. Kibel v'halach v'zarach chutz zmano, and then you do any of the other avodas, thinking that you're going to do eat at chutz zmano. That's one case, which is actually pigul. Oh, you do the first of the shchita with the thought of chutz lizmano. And then when you do the rest of the avodas, you're not having that thought. Or you do all of the avodas with the thought of chutz lizmano. So you did all the avodas, you just had the wrong thought. That is what counts as pigul. Case of low card of mitzvah. So what is the case? What is an example of a case where you're not doing the rest of it properly? Shachan chusin kama. You did the shchita with the thought of eating it outside of the right place. Kibel v'halach v'zar klutzis mano, and then you did the other avodas with a different bad thought, the thought that you're going to eat it chutzis mano. Kibel v'halach. So then, like so that you don't have any valid avodos. So you had your invalid thought on one of the avodos, but none of the other avodos were valid either because of your other thoughts. Or Oshishacha Chutz Lizmano, or you did the Shchita with Chutz Lizmano intention. The Kibel Valach Vazar Chutz Lim Komo, so the opposite of the previous case, same thing. Oshishacha the Kibel Valach Vazar Chutz Lim Komo Vilizmano. Or you did the Shchita and the Kabbalah and the Halacha and the Zrika with a thought of outside of its right place. Or any of them, not all of them, but doing the other three. In other words, any kind of mix of valid and invalid makes the carbon not kares, not pickle. A Pesach v'chatas, or if you have a Pesach or a chatas, sheshchatan shelo lishman, you did the shchita not for their own sake, and that makes the carbon invalid. Pesach has to be l'shem Pesach. V'kibo v'halach v'zar chutz lizmano, and then you did all the other avodas with the intention of chutz lizmano. That's not pigul because the shchita was not done properly because of the lack of lishma intention. Or vice versa, that you did the shechita for the l'shem Pesach, but thinking that you're going to eat it 2 days later, right? And then you did the rest of the avodas not lishma, so that's not pigul because the rest of the avodah wasn't valid either. Or you did any of these other any of the avodah shlo lishma. So that's an example of where pigul doesn't take effect because the other activities of the carbon, the other avodas, were not done properly. And now we mentioned that it has to be a kazayas, that you're planning to eat a kazayas of outside of the time or place. Lechel kazayas b'chutz, kazayas l'machar. The intention to eat a kazayas outside of the right place, and then another kazayas to eat it outside of the right time, or kazayas l'machar or kazayas b'chutz, or the other way around, or half a kazayas you intended to eat outside the right place, and half you intended to eat outside the right time, or vice versa. Possibly makar. So again, that's not kares. It's still pigul, but you don't get kares. You only get kares if you have the intention of a kazayas for one of the chutz lizman or chutz limkama. Amar Yehuda, zaklal. Kol shemachshavas hazman kadmel machshavas hamakam. Where Rabbi Yehuda says, here's the rule.
Well, no, is that pigul? We just all this? That's not.
Yeah,
It's
that's pigul, but you don't get kares. I
oh,
think that's how I understand it.
I'm just thinking it may be just the carbon is puzzle, right? Puzzle.
Yeah, so actually the Gemara will discuss details. You might it's there's machlokas about it. The Gemara will discuss this tomorrow, I think. We'll see. We'll soon see. Amar Rabbi Yehuda says this is a rule. If you first had the thought of chutz lismano, and then you had a thought of chutz limkoma, pigul v'chayav lev kares. That's classic pigul, and you get kares. But if you first had a thought of chutz limkomo, which does not get kares, and then you had a thought of chutz lismano, which would get kares, possibly kares, then it's possible, but you don't get kares.
Oh, so then it makes a distinction here. He's using the word puzzle versus pigul.
Yeah, because I guess pigul implies including kares, I suppose.
That's what I'm thinking.
Yeah. But the rabbis say zev apostle v'im. Both cases, you get it because it's partly chutz lizmano and partly chutz limkomo. It's possible, but you don't get kares. But lechol kachatzizayis lahaktir kachatzizayis. If you had the intention to eat a half a kazayis and to outside of the right time. And to burn half of it outside the right time, kosher, then that's a valid thing because you didn't have pigul. A pigul thought about pigul only applies to the eating of it, right? So you didn't have a pigul thought for a full kazayas. Because you don't mix these two things. Like either you have to have a full kazayas intending to be eaten improperly, or a full kazayas intended to be burned improperly.
So it has to be a kazayat, right? If
Yes,
it's
it has to be
less than
correct.
that,
Absolutely.
then if it's less than that, it doesn't involve pigul then, right? Less
Yes,
than kazayat.
right. I mean, it might be pater avalos, or that you're not allowed to do it, but it doesn't make it pigul. Correct.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so I think we'll stop here and let David or Ellie pick it up tomorrow from the beginning of the Gemara on this Mishnah. Have a good yantiv, everybody. Good kvittel, as they say.
Good yantiv. Good yantiv.
Good yantiv.